Good afternoon, everyone. Let's call today's Board of Trustees meeting to order at 4 p.m. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Belkowski,
Present.
Epic,
Here.
McNamee,
Yeah.
Nunley,
Here.
Sheets, Swanson, Zibble.
Here.
Okay, thank you, everyone. If we could please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. And Mr. Zibble, would you be as kind to read the mission statement, please?
Laketran is committed to providing quality public transportation services to all Lake County residents, with special emphasis on meeting the transportation needs of seniors and people with disabilities.
Thank you very much. Are there any public comments in the room today? Seeing none. Is there a motion to approve the Laketran Board of Trustees Board meeting minutes of May 23rd, 2022?
So moved.
Motion made by Ms. Nunley. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Sheets, I believe. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Yes.
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 Thank you, everyone. At this time, is there a motion to enter into executive session to consider the appointment, employment, dismissal, discipline, promotion, demotion, or compensation of a public employee or official pursuant to section 121.22G1 of the Ohio Revised Code? Motion made by Mr. Swanson. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Sheets. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
McNamee, Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. The board will be going into executive session at 4:02 p.m. and we will be inviting Mr. Dines to stay with us.
For our YouTube viewers, the stream will end and another video will come up.
We are back. Okay. At this time, I'm going to turn the meeting over to Ben for a presentation on 2023 additional services.
Thank you, Brian. I have to admit, I am pretty excited tonight. We haven't talked about something quite like this for a while. And yeah, so what I want to talk about is some additional service for 2023. Why are we talking about it? The reason is relatively simple. With the new federal infrastructure bill, we will be receiving additional federal dollars through our 5307 grant by formula for the next 5 years. So this money is essentially guaranteed for 2023 through 2028. We will get $775,000 federal dollars, which then require a local match of $193,000. So we will receive just under $1 million in new funds annually. The local share is not new, but the federal dollars are. So the new money is really $775, but the total is $868. So when we think about what we want to do with those dollars, right now our cash balance is in a good place. So the appropriate thing to do is look at what other services could we improve or do better or make a change to. And there's actually some easy answers to that about what those services should be. The first one is weekday service, and it is an hour of extra service in the morning and an hour of extra service at night on both fixed routes and dial-a-ride. So today, dial-a-ride operates from 5 a.m. to 6 a.m., but it's a first come, first served basis with very limited resources. So this would change that to be the rest of our normal dial-a-ride program where we have more resources available. It would also expand local routes to start at 5 instead of 6. And then in the evening, we would expand both to run until 9 p.m. So this would add, fundamentally, it adds an hour in the morning, an hour at night. That's the first part of this. The second part would be to run more frequent service on Saturdays. So this is kind of an overwhelming chart, but there's not a great way for me to display this. Right now, the route buses run on Saturday. They run every 2 hours. So if you're waiting at a bus stop, the bus comes every 2 hours, which can be relatively difficult to rely on, whether it's for work or shopping or anything. That 2 hours is a long time to wait. So what we are proposing to do is change that to essentially be every 1 hour. We would also put Route 4 and 9 into service on the weekend. So the headway in the transit world is how often a bus comes, and which right now you can see in that one column is generally 2 hours or none. Route 5 is the exception. Route 5 is a smaller loop, so it comes every hour already. But everything would change to being every hour, which would be much easier for folks to use and get where they need to go. So those are really the two big kind of changes we're proposing, two big concepts. So summary, weekdays is 1 more hour of local routes, improved dial-a-ride in the morning. Evening is 1 more hour of local routes and 1 more hour of dial-a-ride. Saturdays is hourly fixed route service. So those are the changes we're proposing. Why are we proposing these changes? We have heard consistently from the public that these are things they want. To layer onto that in a second, I'll show you. People tell us they want things all the time. There's always hey, we'd like this, hey, we'd like this. Sometimes we wonder, everyone wants this, will they use it? So that's always a question we ask. So I have some graphs on here to talk about what people have asked for. So in this graph, 42% of people wanted earlier or later service. 46% of people wanted Saturday service. At the time, we had no Saturday service. But this gives you an idea in our 2020 or our 2013 transportation plan, when we talk about what are 3 things to improve, these 2 things were very high on the people's list. When we look at, again, 2013, this question asked to customers and the community, buses need to operate earlier or later than they do now. 85% of people strongly agreed with that statement. So that question was asked to riders and stakeholders and just anyone in the community who wished to participate in that plan. Again, in 2013, do you favor or oppose services that would make changes? So again, this plan was written when we were asking a community about a tax increase. So that tax part is not solely relevant, but talking about additional service at night and evening service to Lakeland and the mall, people are strongly in favor of that. A little more recently, 2019, attitude of the community, Tyler Boulevard service to get people to work. 92% of people we surveyed said that's an important thing. So that's why Route 9 is in this mix. Route 9 and Route 8 together service Tyler Boulevard. 2018, this is a survey we did of the manufacturers where we said, hey, manufacturers on Tyler Boulevard, tell us what your transportation needs are. You can see one of the big ones was they need us earlier than we are operating now. When you think about the bus starting at 6 o'clock, that means people can't get to work until 7 or 8. So to get to work at 6, the bus needs to start a little earlier. So 61% of the employers asked for earlier service. When we did a survey of our customers on local routes, we asked them to rank which of these things were their priority. Extended hours, number 1. This is a really important one. Transit Go is the grant program we got awarded through the Paradox Prize that was to get people to work, specifically to get people to work. And so this isn't data about would I use it? this is more concrete data about why can't you use it. So the people that signed up for Dial-A-Ride in Transit Go, 41% of them said the reason that they signed up for Dial-A-Ride is because the local routes don't operate early enough for them to get to work, because they need to be at work at 6. So that's the second biggest reason why people selected Dial-A-Ride on Transit Go, which is, again, a pretty big deal. So we have data that very strongly supports this is the right place to make changes. The other thing that is a part of this is, when me and my team are out in the community, wearing Laketran shirts, talking to people and engaging with them, we also hear that consistently. When we talk to people out in the community, if they engage us, we talk about, what's your transit story? Explain to me how you use us. I had a conversation with a guy at UPS the other day that said, he uses us. He can't take all the shifts he wants to at work because he can't get to work early enough. So this is just kind of a sample of back till 2013 of people telling us consistently that they want earlier service, they want better service on Saturday. So to summarize again, weekdays, one more hour of service on local routes, improved Dial-A-Ride in the morning, 1 hour of local routes in the evening with some expanded Dial-A-Ride, and hourly service on fixed route. So that's kind of the what and the why. This is a little bit about the how. So this is how much those services cost. So the additional hours for a full year is about $442,000. For the extra service on Saturday is $316,000, which is a total of $758,000, which is below the amount we have available. That leaves us with $209,000 roughly for a van pool pilot program or anything else we want to add. So this doesn't use up all the funds we'll get from the feds if we want to do a pilot, or if we just want to keep a little bit extra on the side. So this is something that my team has talked a lot about internally. This is a pretty quick overview, trying to be respectful of the board's time. But it's also not that complicated. It's essentially an hour of extra service on the front and the back end and improved service on Saturday. What's important to understand in these costs is there's no extra buses involved in this. The main need in here would be 4 additional full-time employees. So what I have is, as far as the next steps would be, I wanted to introduce this to the board tonight, just let people think about it, decide if they have questions, see how they feel about it. I would want to bring it back to the board next month to do a vote, say, hey, yes, this is something we're interested in moving forward with. If the board is interested, we need to vote on 4 additional full-time jobs in the org chart in September, so we can kind of start the hiring process and start moving towards that. It takes us a good amount of time internally to update the materials, all the operational things that take place to make this happen. It's relatively labor intensive, making sure all the shifts line up, getting all the different people moved around. It does take some time. The union picks shifts 3 times a year. So they pick shifts in January, May, and I blank on that one, September. And so our plan would be to have this ready for the January pick in 2023, which means service would start sometime in February. So this gives us some time to lay it all out, make sure that the board is comfortable with this concept. The money will start arriving to us in October of this year, because the federal fiscal year starts October 1st. So the dollars start October 1. So they will be available essentially a couple days after the board would to vote on the full-time jobs. So I think this is actually pretty exciting. This is something the community has consistently asked us for. And not just, and this time why I'm especially excited about it is it's not just something the community has asked us for. We have actual data that says people are using Dial-A-Ride instead of fixed route because the fixed route isn't available. And fixed route is the most efficient way to move people in Lake County over Dial-A-Ride. So I think this is something that will enable people to get to work more easily, will help some of our employers with first shift. I think it will also help a little bit with second shift by having buses run until 9 p.m. And then obviously anything happening on a Saturday, if you imagine going to the store and having to wait 2 hours for a bus, and then wait 2 hours to go back. You know, you're at a store for 2 hours. So it's not that convenient. Or if you work, you might have a very limited number of times to try and take the bus. So I think this is actually a pretty exciting idea. And I think one of the most exciting things about it is we have a lot of data to support this being something that folks have asked for. So I did want to, I know that's kind of quick, a quick rundown, but I did want to just kind of open up to discussion to see, you know, what the board thought, immediate reactions, questions, more information you'd like, anything like that. And I know this is the first time you're hearing it in this kind of detail. So I don't expect you to just have 8 million questions all at once. Might take some time to marinate.
Did you say the numbers included the drivers or not the wages?
Yeah, so this number is wages, fuel. This is all encompassing of what's needed to operate the service.
Okay, so the balance of that that's left, let's say the $209,000, using a variety of fuels here, electric, diesel, and propane, is that something with costs escalating that we're gonna wanna hold on to that just for fuel purposes, so our general budget isn't absorbed with that?
Yeah, that's certainly something we can do. When we calculated fuel in this, we had a pretty significant increase over what it is today, but the regular budget will definitely have some impacts for fuel. So keeping that money aside for anything else, whether it's fuel or van pool is totally fine.
And what kind of it's off the top of your head, what kind of percentages have there been with the electricity and the propane compared to gas?
We did a calculation the other day. Actually, we're going to share it here with the board pretty soon.
Oh, sorry, I didn't know that.
No, it's okay. It's not in the presentation. The cost per 100 miles to fuel a fixed route bus if I remember the number correct, is around $78. And the cost to quote fuel an electric bus, I'm sorry, the cost to fuel a diesel bus is $78. The cost to fuel an electric bus is roughly $56. So it's about 30% cheaper. And electricity is a much more stable commodity. So I would expect that rate to stay similar for next year. Propane, we're paying $1.75 a gallon right now. And that price has not fluctuated as much as gas and diesel. It has fluctuated, but it hasn't fluctuated as much. So I'm happy to say, because we have, if you want to think of it like a stock portfolio, we're well diversified in diesel, gas, electricity, and propane. We will certainly see some impacts next year, but they'll be much less significant than some of our peers. But I think keeping those dollars aside for fuel is a perfectly safe idea.
Thank you.
It's a long answer, I'm sorry.
Hey, Ben,
Sure.
did we ever get a bill from the electric company for our charging stations?
We have gotten bills for all of them except Lakeland has been, for some reason, the illuminating company we got a bill for $32.
Well, pay it.
So we're just kind of going to run with it for now, but we've been wanting to present the results of the electric bus charging to the board. We're struggling to get good bills from Lakeland, which is the first one we built, which is the one, it makes the least sense. So I know our facilities guy, Mark, has a conversation with them just about weekly, trying to get corrected bills. So
Does that $56, 100 miles or whatever, is that representative of our costs? Or is that what they're estimating?
we did some estimating to get to that number based on the other 3 locations. The only reason I haven't presented to the board is I didn't want to do it with an estimate. I wanted to have better numbers for you than this is what we're guessing. I'd rather have solid data, but I doubt it will vary a lot from that.
Let's send them a contract for $32 a month.
If I could get them to agree to it, I'd drive to wherever their headquarters is in Akron. Do you have a question, Donna?
You're talking about standing dial ride. The evening to an 8 to 8:30 pickup, am I understanding that correctly?
It would be an 8:30 to 9 pickup.
8:30 to 9. That is the only piece of service that has not been replaced since the 2009 service cuts after the meltdown, when our sales tax was impacted so severely. I am wondering if there might be any way to bring that piece of the service back in time for the holidays for our passengers. rather than make them wait another 8 weeks. And I don't need an answer right now. I just wanted to pose the question for you to think about.
Matt and I can talk about that. The expanding dial-a-ride is not as difficult internally as fixed route because we don't have to publish as many materials and schedule as many things. So I would say that is most likely possible. I would want to sit down with my team and make sure of that if the board was interested in that. But I think that's, I would say 80% confident we could accomplish that.
I think that would be a nice and welcome gesture to our passengers.
I guess I would also ask, what do you consider the holidays? When does that start for you?
Well, when we've done holiday service, you started it in the middle of November. I was thinking even from mid-December until after New Year's, even just put some holiday service out there.
Okay.
But right around the holidays.
Okay.
And, with the proviso that coming in February, it'll be here permanently.
Sure. We can sit down and talk about that. I think if the board is enthusiastic about this type of thing, I think we probably could accommodate that this year. I want to go over it with Matt and Lisa and
I
Julia. But I think that's probably possible.
I would appreciate you looking into it, and I'm sure many more passengers will as well. My other comment / question was, you commented about people using dial-a-ride instead of fixed routes because service was not out there the time they needed it. Is it your expectation that will free up some passenger space on dial-a-ride ultimately? Because it's getting really tight again.
I think that if a fixed route is operating earlier in the morning, those folks that are on dial-a-ride now would move over to fixed route. And so that space in that time of day would be freed up, yes. The other thing that's kind of later in my CEO report is staffing has greatly impacted the tightness, which I think we have done a good job solving. So when we get to that, I'll mention it. But I think that ultimately, yes, because some people would move to fixed route, it would free up some trips on dial-a-ride.
That will be a good thing.
So if anybody has any questions this month, wants to talk more about this, understand it a little bit more, I'd love for everyone to get a chance to talk to me about it if they have questions, so that if the board feels comfortable and excited about this next month, we can vote on it to move forward, or make changes or something else. But yeah.
Any other questions or comments for Ben at this time? Seeing none, thank you. Looks like our first agenda item is our financials. Lisa.
Yes.
Okay, so I'm reporting for April, the month of April, and everything seems to be going smoothly. Our total revenues year to date for April is about 12 million. We estimated we would be at 13.3 million. Our operating expenses were at 6.5 million. We budgeted to be around 7.5 million, so we're slightly less. And our capital expenditures, just our local portion, so far year to date through April is around 37,000, bringing our income at about 5.5 million, and we budgeted to be about 5.9 million. Depreciations, it's estimated till the end of the year at 1.8 million, bringing us to a net income of about 3.7 million after depreciation. I would say we're moving right along. I did do a draw on our federal grants this month for about $4 million. I did not move that money at this point. I just did it at the end of last week. I will probably do that about the beginning of July. But I do know that we do have some expenditures, like the stuff that's being done outside in the front and that we're going to have to make payments and stuff for. So I just want to make sure we have the money there to do that. And if we go to the next page, this will give just a little bit more detail, kind of summarizing the 12 million being at almost 800,000 fares and miscellaneous. Sales tax is at about 7.1 million. So we're a little bit less than what we had budgeted at 7.4. And our federal and state revenues slightly a little bit less, but that's also because we're not spending as much. We can only draw down what we spend. So we're getting reimbursed on those operating expenses for those grants. And again, I'll refresh, we are on our third COVID-19 or pandemic grant, which is the American Recovery Grant. And we will, it looks to me like we will draw that down fully this year. So we won't have this additional high state and federal going into 2023. But that's also, you see that, and you'll see it when I get to that. It's in our cash balance. So as far as wages and benefits, we are just slightly below where we budgeted to be at about 5 million versus the 5.3. Again, that's just staffing. We've done some more hiring and stuff like that. So I do expect that to increase slightly. Services and software is a little bit less. That could just be timing on when the expenses come through. And the other big one would be our utilities and insurance, about 3.7. Even supplies is down, considering fuel is higher in that. We're still lower than where we said we would be at the 1 million. So all in all, we're doing fairly good. And I would say on target. If you also look and you compare the 2021 versus the budget, we're like right in the middle of that. Because 2021, we had a couple different grants we were drawn down for revenue, and we were still seeing some of the slowness, with the economy and stuff due to the pandemic. So. And then I will move on, unless we have any questions on the original operating budget, to our special transportation. Oh, okay. So special transportation, we are again somewhere in between. We were hoping to be at around 65,000 in expenses and revenue. Our revenues year to date are at 25,000. Our expenses are at 54. Reason expenses are slightly higher. We have fixed costs in there, such as just insurance on the vehicles and our facility that we rent, and that doesn't change whether we use the service or we don't. So that's why that's slightly higher. But we are definitely doing better than we were in 2021. So, and if we go to the next page here, we have the detail. Kind of shows most of our fares are about 25 million. The miscellaneous is just the interest on the money we have in our savings accounts. Wages and benefits. So, I mean, you can see the growth there. We are at 2021, 25,000 in 22, and we estimated to be at 37,000. So I would say we're doing fairly on target. We've spent a little bit more than what we've taken in. So by 11,000, but that's to be expected for this year. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer those on STS. Otherwise, I'll move on and we'll go to the cash balance. Okay, so our cash balance, we are currently at 41,500,000. The operating is almost the 8 million. Capital, which is 2022 and prior, those are commitments that we've made that we have to spend cash on at about 7.4 million. And our STS, we have the cash set aside separate for that. We're at 589. The other is our 25.5 million that is there to use as whatever the board approves for. So that's what brings our total cash. And the main reason for the other is all the grants that we've drawn down really from the American Recovery and additional from sales tax. And this, is there any questions on that, on the cash balance, I guess I should say, before we go to the capital, which kind of will define the 7.4? Yes, Donna.
I just want to clarify that the 25,534,995, that is the total amount of the grants we've gotten, federal grants?
I would say the majority of it is, it's whatever our cash is when we bring on all of our revenue for all of our sources and we take out all our expenses. This is what we have left as a cash balance. Now, there could still be, this is a cash balance. Remember, Laketran does accrual basis accounting. So we also probably have some accounts receivables out there that are due to us, just the same as we have accounts payables out there that we are due to pay. So, but this is our cash balance at the end of April 30th. If you were to look at all of our bank statements, this is what would be in there. And it is mainly from drawing down all those federal grants. Just to refresh, we had 3 of them. We had the CARES Act was the first one. The second one we had was the CRISA grant. And then the third one is the American Recovery. I don't remember the exact amount of all of them. I know the American Recovery is around 9 million. Andrea could probably help me a little bit on that one. And CRISA, I think, was like 6 million and something, or CRISA. And then the CARES Act was probably around 8 million, something like that, 6, 7, something like that. So, and that was all we used most of it. There's just a tiny, tiny bit. And the CARES Act that we used for the purchases and buses, like 600,000. All the rest of it was used for operational expenses to be able to draw that down.
And this, because this was the end of April, doesn't include the 4 million you mentioned earlier.
It does
So
not.
this is actually 4 million higher than on this.
That is correct.
Because this was at the end of April.
Yes. I know it's hard because I'm doing it 2 months behind, but.
So hanging out there is the 14.7 million grant that we've not done anything with yet. Is that right? Or am I missing something?
No, the American Recovery is the third grant, and we are currently drawing down on that. We drew down a little bit. Let me see. I think I have it. I try to put it on here, but it's small, so I have to look at it here. On the American Recovery, it was like 9.6 million, and we have drawn down on that through April about 2.9 million. So it would be that 9.8 minus the 2.9 is what we still have left to draw down for this year. But all the other grants have been drawn down and we have received those funds.
Well, the headquarters grant is a reimbursement.
That's a
So
different
nothing that money is still hanging out. We've not received any of it. The way it would work is if we move forward with the project, the contractors would bill us, we would pay them, and then we would submit to FTA to be reimbursed. So those dollars wouldn't come to us unless we had built something.
That's the
So-
14.7.
So they are not in these numbers at all.
Sorry, I misunderstood.
And are there other similar grants or is it just the one?
There are a couple others. Well, yes, any of the bus grants that are in progress are that way. So yes, there are some other grants that are included in that number that are, funds, you could say owed, but not received. You could kind of think of them as AR. But yes, there are some.
So that does not include the $14.7 million grant.
Correct. So every federal grant is a reimbursement. So there are our 5307 funds we use for capitalized maintenance, the building grant, bus grants, all of those things are only given to us once we have spent the dollars. What's the reason this number is unusually high is because the 3 stimulus grants were also reimbursements, but we used them on operating. So fundamentally what we did is we spent those dollars on operations and we put our sales tax into this account. And so what Lisa's talking about, there is still some to draw down from those grants, but still the money is spent and then we are reimbursed. So it does not normally show up in cash. It usually comes in and out relatively quickly, not impacting our cash balance. Those grants were unusual. Hope that answers your question.
It certainly answers mine.
Okay, I think maybe I'll at some point I'll do a graph kind of showing what we were before the pandemic with grants, through the pandemic, and then now to the end, and you'll kind of see it go like this. And And that's, I was talking about operating, but the capital, that shows up on the cash balance here, but then that kind of leads me into, we'll just talk about the capital on this side. So when you're looking at the 2022 prior, and the reason I include that is because, any type of capital projects are usually more than a year. Very rarely are they just in that same year. So we don't want to lose sight that we still have those out there and that we still have a commitment. But until those projects are done, if they're usually like buses, Andre usually lets me know that we're going to be drawing that money down, or that we have to pay a bill. So then I will go and draw the money down and then it gets paid out. And then we just have our local commitment that then comes out of our cash balance to meet that obligation.
And if page 15 of the board packet does have all of the grants that exist. So most of these will be grant dollars that are out in the grant sphere that have not yet financially passed through Laketran. So if you have questions about what grants are out there that we have funds in, this would be the best place. There's a lot. It's small, it's hard to read, but this does have that list in its entirety. Some of them are also projections, so we may not quite have them yet, but the formula 5307 funds, we can predict with some regularity will be repetitive. A lot of the federal grant programs happen every year. But so if you ever curious, hey, how much grant money is out there? It's in this capital plan update.
You can zoom in on the computer. I have to print it on an 11 by 18 for myself. So, but in summary, this kind of gives you an idea of what we're projecting for the future. This again is based off of this, but just in summary format. So we are estimating in total over the next through 2027, about 15,283,220 in federal grants. Our local obligation of 7,162,000 and our state obligation of 720,000. And that totals about 23 million. And of course, that's going to change just depending on the needs that come up, as we go through the years. And then just as a side, because we said when we did the budget last year, you asked that we not put the headquarters or anything like that in these numbers. So that's kind of off to the side, just to kind of give you a little bit of input. And I listed it in red. So if you have any questions, Andrea would be happy to answer them.
Any questions for Lisa? Seeing none, is there a motion to approve the April 2022 operating and STS financial statements subject to audit and capital plan review?
So moved.
Motion made by Mr. Epic, seconded by Ms. McNamee. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
McNamee, Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. At this time, I will turn the meeting over to Keith for a discussion of a utility vehicle purchase.
Okay. Here to ask the board for authorization to purchase a replacement utility vehicle. We have U7, it's a 2007 Dodge Caravan in our fleet. It started its career out as being part of the community outreach pool. It was transferred in 2016 to route relief and used for shift switches during the day for route drivers, an additional vehicle for road supervisors and general transportation to seminars and drug and alcohol testing and other around town duties. Right now, there are some issues with the van that really aren't worth fixing. The radio's got a short in it that's killing the battery. It's got an electrical problem that turns on the low oil pressure light, doesn't have low oil pressure. Some body rot, air conditioning issues in the van. Not worth fixing on a 2007 minivan. So we spent some time looking at what types of vehicles we would need. something like a Transit Connect or an Escape is what we thought would be good. There's not a lot of sedans anymore, and it's a little harder for our drivers to get in and out of them for the shift switch things. We got away from sedans when we had Focuses in the fleet. Right now, we can't do a traditional procurement. That's why we're asking for authorization up to $35,000. Dealerships can't hold their price long enough for me to go through the process, do a briefing paper, get board approval, and then create a purchase order. Once I get approval, they won't hold their prices. We looked at buying a vehicle off the state contract, but Ford closed their order banks. They're not open until September for 2023 model year, and they can't guarantee what the price on next year's state contract's going to be. And then it'll still be 12 to maybe even 18 months before they could deliver the vehicle, depending on the chip shortage. Sorry about that. Easy for me to say. So we're planning on buying a vehicle off lot once we found one at a reasonable price under the $35,000. So. It's not gonna move. So I'm asking for authorization from the board to purchase a replacement utility vehicle at a cost not to exceed $35,000. Can I answer any questions?
Questions or comments for Keith?
Keith, is this just a standard off the lot type vehicle, or is there some special additions that you have to have added into it, other than like the radios and things like that?
We're just planning adding a radio in one of our fluid management things. No cameras, nothing like that.
Okay.
No revenue collection or anything.
But the seating and everything is just the standard type.
Correct. That's the plan. Yes.
Any other questions for Keith? At this time, is there a motion to approve the resolution authorizing the CEO or his designee to purchase a replacement utility vehicle at a cost not to exceed $35,000? Motion made by Ms. McNamee. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Zibble. Trudy, could you please call the roll?
Epic,
Yes.
McNamee, Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, thank you very much. And moving on to our next agenda item is the 6-month look ahead.
All righty, back to me. At our July meeting, we will have our federal grant authority, another routine item to approve our ability to apply for federal grants. We'll have a approval request to approve the DBE goal and plan. This is required by the feds. This plan will be good for 2023 through 2025. This sets Laketran's goal for our disadvantaged business enterprise participation. We will have a approval request for the purchase of replacement dial-a-ride buses. We are wrapping up the procurement process. What the vendors are telling us is about 18 months, heavily dependent on Ford. So they are doing their best to project, but Ford's chassis production is the big kind of hold for them. So we don't expect the buses that we asked the board to approve in July would be on our property until at least 2024. There'll be one additional expansion bus for service to Lake Erie College. We are in the contract negotiation process. I expect that to go well, and I would think it will be wrapped up in time for the board to vote on a bus for that service in July. August, this is dependent on some other stuff, but there could be a special meeting just to put on everyone's calendar potentially. September, the auditors will be here to provide an overview of the 2022 audit. We'll have an approval request to accept the 2022 audit. We'll have a request to update the pay grade tables. I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. This does not include any wage changes. This is just the table that the grades are on. So this is the ranges people can be paid. It does not affect anyone's actual pay. More in September, we have a supplemental paratransit service for Breckenridge. So every 3 years we bid for this service. Breckenridge is typically the low bidder, and this provides dial-a-ride service to Breckenridge. The reason this is a good deal for us is they provide some of the funds to do it. We provide some of the funds to do it. So kind of combining efforts results in a lower cost for both entities. Our Cornerstone service agreement will be at time for its last option year. So we had an internal discussion about whether or not we should review this, but we didn't think that it was a good idea to make a change until we had completed the IT strategic plan. So we will be bringing this to the board in September for the last renewal year, with the idea that there may be some changes to this in the future after we do the strategic plan. And just in case anyone hasn't heard, Cornerstone did sell to a company based in Wisconsin. So Ray Paganini will still be the local partner that runs it, but the company was sold. I forget the name of the company that it was sold to. Tony, you don't remember the name of the company that Ray sold to, do you?
It is logically, it's logically Logically.
Okay, so logically. Maine. I'm sorry, I thought it was Wisconsin. So logically will be the new provider. In October, we'll have a request for fleet detailing. We currently use Deepwood Industries Community Employment Services to complete fleet detailing. The contract is expiring and we will go to bid again. Similar situation for janitorial. We use Deepwood's Community Employment Services and it's expiring. Should we be taking some action on the building, we will make accommodations in the procurement to address changes in scope of the project should the HQ project move forward. We expect to have a vendor selected for the IT strategic plan and have an award for that contract in October. In November, we will present the annual budget as we have before. We will also have a approval request for gasoline and diesel. I do expect those to be up somewhat from this contract. As you all may have guessed, I don't have a good feel for where that will be at the moment. We get monthly hedging reports on how much the fuel costs are changing. So I would expect it to be a pretty decent size increase, but the projections we get show a leveling off of fuel changes and a potential decrease. So I'm not exactly sure where it will land. December, we'll have a request to approve the budget. And then December, we will have a request for a replacement garage floor sweeper. So I call these street sweepers. We have 2 of them. They are machines that we use to sweep essentially the garage floor. They're both purchased in 2007. Both of them suffered significant failures at the end of winter 2021. We scavenged parts from one to keep the other operational. Unfortunately, the parts for these pieces of equipment are no longer produced, so we couldn't buy new parts for them. This request we will bring to the board would be to purchase 1 machine. So we would keep 1 old one in operation and purchase 1 new one. They are an amount of money that makes me sort of sick inside. But these are a pretty important piece of equipment. The reason they don't last as long as they sweep up salt and a lot of pretty corrosive materials. So we will pursue some grant money to fund them. But yeah, there's unfortunately, this is one of those things that it's kind of like when your furnace breaks, there's not much you can do about it. No matter how much you don't want to spend it, you basically have to. So we will be bringing that to the board in December. And then in January, we have the Title VI approval plan, which again, the Federal Transit Administration requires all transit systems to have a Title VI plan. The Title VI plan essentially demonstrates to the feds that we are providing service in an equitable way. So the reason this exists is in the past, there are transit systems that would put the new buses in service on the wealthier neighborhood runs and the old buses in the poorer communities. With some regularity. So the Fed said, you can't do that anymore. You need to distribute assets equally. Really is not a problem for Laketran. All of our stuff moves around pretty freely, but everyone is required to have a plan because of that practice in the past. I'll roll on through to the CEO report if that's okay. I wanted to follow up. The change we made in hiring was effective. So we had a hiring event in May. And I'm very pleased to say we saw an increase in applicants and we saw an increase in job offers. And I think the most important thing to understand is the quality of the applicants was much better. So as you can see, we have 17 people that stayed from 22 offers. So the recovery rate or the retention rate was much better. Even our training department has made comments that we really have some good candidates right now, so that we can all feel good that the changes have made a positive impact. I think this is the biggest training class we've ever had since I've worked here. So in over 10 years, this is the largest group of people we've had in training. And once they finish training, they should help relieve some of the challenges that are taking place on Dial-A-Ride right now.
How many were you looking for?
We were looking for, what's our target?
25.
25. So still didn't quite meet the target, but did pretty good. Couple quick updates. Geauga County Transit Study, RLS will be reaching out to the board here in the next day or two to schedule phone interviews. So expect an email from them. You'll probably get one from me also, just introducing you to the consultants. Lake Erie College Service, as I mentioned, we're in the process of negotiating the contract. Brandon sent me the draft and I still need to review it, but we're moving right along. The IT strategic plan, we are have had a couple meetings internally and we are finalizing the RFP. Once the RFP is complete, before it goes out to procurement, we will send it out to the board for them to review in case any of you have any questions or comments or things you'd like to have us change. These are not super common in the transit industry. So when we looked around to ask for budgets from our peers or other people, the best examples we could find were cities. So we are estimating around $125,000. That was what we sort of saw from the other people that had done these. I'm not 100% sure if that's the right number. I hope it's a little high, but it's been hard to kind of get specific examples. And the disaster recovery plan for IT, the plan is in progress, and we will have it reviewed by our auditor with a target completion date of the fourth quarter of this year. It's been a little bit difficult to get that done just because of the many directions Tony gets pulled in, but we will have it done by the end of this year. I want to draw the board's attention to a new thing that we're going to put in the board packet each month. So right now we have the financial report, which is in the board packet regularly. And we want to keep the board packet thin, but I think that it would be really good for us to include 2 pages of ridership information in the board packet. So I'm going to have Matt do a summary of ridership information that'll just be in the packet for you to see. We also wanted to put together we get questions a lot from the board of how do we tell how Dial-A-Ride is doing? And it's not one thing. So I tasked Matt and operations with put together a easy to digest, how is Dial-A-Ride performing, 1-pager. And so this is it. These are some of the key metrics that we look at as to how Dial-A-Ride is performing. So this is from March. So the definitions are on here. We have a little slider that kind of indicates where it is in reference to our goals. I would keep in mind the goals are set by us. There's not a federal rule or some outside pressure that is telling us what these goals should be. But when you look at the performance of Dial-A-Ride, you can never look at just one indicator. You can, but it's better to look at all of them holistically and how they all intertwine. Because if one of them spikes in one direction or another, it might not be indicative of a larger problem. So we did our best to make this easy to digest and easy to kind of look at where we are and where we should be. So this is something that we're going to put in the board packet on a monthly basis for the board to understand, get familiar with. Later, if we want, once the board has seen this for a couple months, if we want to adjust the goals to something the board feels more strongly about, we will be happy to. This report or this document right here is from March. So this does a good job kind of outlining where Dial-A-Ride is doing well or doing poorly. And hopefully this will give the board a better sort of view of Dial-A-Ride's performance. I will quickly go through what each of these things are. So in the top block, we have on-time performance. Early arrival, that means did the bus get there before we told the person it would get there? late arrival, did the bus get there after we told the person it would get there? Appointment time means, did the person get delivered to their appointment on time? And that means on time or a little bit early. Capacity, so on-time performance, those are things that a person are time sensitive of how a person interacts with Dial-A-Ride. Capacity is the number of trips. So denials is pretty self-explanatory. How many people could not be accommodated within 1 hour of the time they requested? So we do try to negotiate those times back and forth. If it doesn't quite hit the exact time they want, we try and get it within an hour. Unscheduled trips, I know you've all heard me talk about those before. Those are trips scheduled beyond our capacity or booked beyond our capacity. Non-essential trips, those are trips that don't fall into the essential list. So if we all remember, essential trips are work, medical, ADA, adult daycare, and senior center. So if it falls into that category, we always say yes. If it's not into that category, we say no. So this is the percent of our total trips that were not essential. So we target 25% because there's all kinds of things people do that don't fall into those categories. And then complaints, we have more complaint data than this. We tried to focus on the complaints that are related specifically to service. So, you know, if a customer complains that a driver was rude, that doesn't really impact the bus's ability to provide service. So we narrowed this down to complaints that were specifically in regard to the service, timeliness, or capacity. We can obviously share the additional complaint data if the board would like to see it. The totals are in Matt's report in Govenda, but we wanted to be a little more targeted with the complaints in this document. So yeah, so I don't know if anybody has any questions about this as it is, but we plan to put this in the board packet on a monthly basis just for the board to kind of see how Dial-A-Ride is doing.
In the order for non-essential trips, the way you do it, or if that,
Just randomly listed there. The order of essential trips.
There is not the order does not matter. So it doesn't matter in the service delivery, nor does it matter on how it's written out on here.
Well, the ADA one is the only one that's basically mandated that under certain conditions that it's there. That is an essential.
All of those trips on that list are considered essential by ADA or by Laketran. They're all treated ADA. They're all treated the same.
Understood.
Does anybody have any questions? If you want to go over this in a little more detail, you know, with me, let me know. I'll be happy to talk about it a little bit more. Sorry, I have a little longer report tonight. Next is the grant applications. So this is the newer spreadsheet that we've put in the packet. Some of these were in the draft one I showed. So the top 4 are competitive grants to ODOT. OTP2 is the Ohio Transit Partnership Program. So we applied for capitalized maintenance, a planning study about Title VI and fair media analysis. This has to do with being able to go without fare boxes in some of the buses. We have a planning study for targeted passenger amenities. So this would be to help identify where additional passenger amenities may be needed. We have a software development, which may end up being a procurement for flexible employment. One of the things me and my team have been talking about a lot on the back end is if any of you are familiar with how Amazon Flex works or Uber Eats or any of those things, from an employee perspective, you sign into an app and you're working and you can do it very flexibly. So a lot of the people that do that can be competitors for our jobs. So we've been talking about a way to schedule employees in a more flexible way that they can essentially sign up for work on their phone. We haven't found a product that would do that yet. So we may have to talk about developing an app or something, but we applied for innovative funds from ODOT to do that. You can see the application for the replacement floor scrubber. The bottom 2 are formula grants from the feds. These come every year. And so the list of things that we included in those are capitalized maintenance, professional services, which is pretty open-ended. bus shelters, bus stop signs, ADA operating dollars, and miscellaneous equipment. So those are formula grants that the feds say, hey, that's how much money you have. 5339 is the same. So 5307 is where we spend money for maintenance and some other stuff. 5339 is specifically for capital purchases, like replacement vehicles, garage work. So the 5307 and 5339 have been awarded. So those are in the kind of processing stages. I thought I'd next we'll go over, I know we all have been wanting to see the headquarters estimate, so I have that to show everybody. So this is something I showed to the Special Projects Committee. This is the funding available for the project. Some of it has been around for a while. So in the top three, there is federal fiscal year 21 for three things. 5339A is a grant. Some of you were on the board when I was preparing monthly CEO reports with, if you remember the pie chart of funding for HQ, these top two were a part of that were applied for quite a while ago that are out there hanging out available for use. So we have roughly $1.3 million in grants from a year plus ago. And then the bigger grant that everyone is familiar with is the 5339B, which is the $14.6 million. So the federal share is the amount we get from the feds. Local is the amount of local dollars that we have to match that with. And so then on the right is the total. The next line is optional grant revenue. So those are dollars we could choose to use for HQ or choose to do something else with. We have just under $400,000 of our fiscal year 22 5339A, and we have $825,000 of fiscal year 22 5307 funds. So the total amount that we could use for construction today is just over $20 million. That does not include that $825,000. So if you added those two together, you'd be right at around $21 million available today to spend on an HQ project. The expenses, the estimate, I know we've all been waiting for this. I got it about an hour before the Special Projects Committee meeting. This is the same slide. I showed them with some adjustments to the percentages I used since they were, I think the ones I had originally were a little confusing. So this is the estimate that we got. So there are, the base bid is the office / maintenance part. So that came in at an estimate of just over $14 million. Bus storage is what's called an ad alternate, which came in at $7.3 million. The front driveway, I know for some of you that were on the board in 2020, this was subtracted out as a separate bid item in 2020. So all those things together, the estimate came in at $21.8 million. If we were to do it exactly like this, and again, this is an estimate, so we don't know how the actual bids would come in, would be 72% federal, 28% local. That does not include the contingency. So that estimate is just for construction. The contingency, I put this in here at 7.5%. That is a number that we can change. There's no rule about what that has to be. Commonly, it's between 5 and 10%. So I just split the difference and put it right in the middle. So if we move forward with the whole project as it is, the total project and we spent all the contingency, I guess I should go back and say the contingency is there in case they find something that we didn't expect or there's an issue that has to be resolved. That doesn't mean that all of those dollars will be spent. You will inevitably spend some, but you will not spend all, or it is very unlikely that you will spend all. So if we move forward with it like this, the total amount in federal dollars we would spend would be about 15.7, maybe 15.8. The total local we would need to be committed to would be 7.7. That includes the contingency. And so the total spent would be 23.5. I won't go into, I think Gary will talk about what those next steps are, I will just say this is the estimate and I will leave it at that. I just have two more things, which is a draft kind of schedule. Draft means it is 100% open to be changed. If we move forward with it like this, again, it is an estimate, so we don't know how it will come back. This is essentially the fastest we could move with it to award it to a contractor. We would finalize the documents, go out to bid on July 8th, go through the bidding process in July, and essentially be ready to bring it to the board at this August 22nd special meeting. So this is kind of the schedule we've been working with. There's a lot of steps in here that it seems like a lot of steps. Keep in mind, we do this every day. We have run this procurement process quite a number of times very successfully. The Lakeland Transit Center, the Wickliffe Transit Center, all the electric bus construction projects, all of these, every construction project that I have managed in my 10 years at Laketran, which is quite a few, use this process. So it's a very comfortable process for us. We have a lot of experience with it. So, quite honestly, why am I even talking about an August 22nd special meeting? I don't think the board wants to have extra meetings. I know me and my staff certainly like the break, but the reason I have this schedule in here at this speed is because of this. So do we really need a meeting in August? I would much rather, I think the board would much rather talk about this in September at a regularly scheduled meeting. The reason I have this suggested is because time is money. And if we think about where we had an estimate that was scheduled for a bid award in September of 21 at 18.3, we have that same project coming in at 21.8 now. It means in the 11 months of change, the price has gone up $3.5 million. So that means that I'm not speaking to what will happen in the future, but in the past, we spent what is in essence $326,000 a month in waiting, which equates to $10,800 a day. So when I think about my job being to get the taxpayers the best bang for the buck, in this case, speed is important because delays are expensive. That doesn't mean that we have to move. I'm not trying to force the board's hand in any way, but I think it is important that we think about how expensive delays can be. This certainly is not a prediction on the future. There could be a recession, prices could go up. I don't know. I just thought it was important for context for the board to see what transpired in the last 11 months. I'm not trying to tell the board what to do in this regard. I just thought it was good to see kind of what this looked at over time. So I hope I didn't step on Gary's toes or steal any of his thunder. I'm sorry, my report was a little long, but unless anyone has any questions about all the stuff I talked about or any of the director's reports, I am done.
Any questions for Ben? Seeing none, I will turn the meeting over to Gary, who I know had a special projects committee meeting.
Thank you. So the Special Projects Committee met on Tuesday, 21st of June, and we had three main topics that we wanted to take a look at. First was a presentation by Chuck Stevenson, who's the retired president of Albert Higley Company, which is a local company that does larger projects. And he was tasked with the idea of presenting to us the role of an owner's representative and or similar roles that we might consider in a building project of this size. The second is a timeline, which Ben has shared with us. And the third was the projected cost updates, which Ben has also shared with us. Chuck Stevenson primarily focused on two roles for us: owner's representative, and construction manager. The main difference being that the owner's rep is usually involved earlier in the process than where we are today. And typically it would be almost from the inception through the completion. Chuck emphasized, at least on a couple of occasions, that the earlier the better in terms of getting your bang for the buck from an owner's rep. The construction manager, on the other hand, is usually involved in the construction phase only. So he comes in, she, that group comes in basically sort of after the bids have already been sent out. Either role could be viewed as a safety valve for both the board and the taxpayers to make sure that the taxpayers' best interests are taken a look at and considered. The costs generally they're negotiable, but they would generally run somewhere between 1% and 4%, depending upon how complicated you wanted their roles to be and how involved you want the roles to be. And again, we might on the board consider these roles almost like an insurance policy that, that would again, make sure that our interests are being protected by someone that has a better level of experience in these complicated, bigger projects, since none of us are particular necessarily experts and or working full-time on the project. So we might consider it just a little bit of insurance policy. So the committee concluded that in order to make a final no-go decision on this, we really need firm numbers. And the way to get firm numbers was to get out for bids so we could develop a firm set of numbers to really look at and decide whether we wanted to move forward or not. So we basically decided it was time to get out for the bids. The second set of that decision process was we suggest that if we are going to go forward on the building, that we include the role of a owner's rep and or a construction manager for protection. So that concludes my comments about the Special Projects Committee. On a personal note, separated from what I just made, I have spent the last 10 days or so reflecting pretty heavily on this on a personal level, and have had numerous conversations and tried to do a lot more research on how these projects go together. And I think I have personally come to a little bit of a different conclusion. When we started, or at least when I started this process, there were at least 4 board members that were relatively newer. Sarah has now stepped down, so that's changed a little bit. But we expressed at the time a little bit of discomfort at the project, in that we didn't know enough about it to know and to make an informed decision. We didn't really understand it, and we felt at the time that $18 million was a lot of money. We weren't sure that we were ready to jump on board. I think we all remember those days. For me personally, really the only thing that's really changed in the ensuing 11 months, has been just suggested, is that we received a $14.7 million grant. I'm not sure I'm still knowledgeable enough about what the actual building is to know that I'm comfortable with this. And just, I guess my sense is because we have the money doesn't necessarily mean we're prepared or should be prepared just to spend the money. So I think for me personally, a little bit more time is called for. And the way to get at this, in my mind, is if we're going to go forward with this thing, bringing in organizational, I personally like the role of the owner's rep as opposed to the construction manager. The owner's rep comes in earlier. Construction manager is fixed with the project as it's currently structured. The owner's rep might be able to help us look at some value engineering on this thing. And the reason I say that is because, to Ben's last slide, costs have changed substantially. And maybe the value propositions of some of this construction has also changed that we should take a look at. For instance, and I'll just throw one out that jumps to mind. In a memo that Ben sent out, it showed some of the costs of the changes in the last few months in construction. Steel costs have skyrocketed. Is an alternate construction now a better thing? Would we get better value? maybe it's time to take another quick look at that stuff. So I guess where I'm at on this, and again, this is not the committee, and I'm sure I've got a couple of committee members that are mad at me at this point, but my personal sense here is that we need to pause and take a breath and make sure that we're comfortable, that we've got the right value engineering and the value proposition on this thing before we go out to bid and cement the project at that point in time. So those are my personal comments at this point.
Well, Gary, at our meeting, if you remember correctly, everybody in that room thought we needed an owner's rep, including Ben. And I don't see any reason why we shouldn't move forward to hiring an owner's rep to take care of your concerns right there. They're the same concerns I have. And it's just, it makes sense for the board, for Ben, for the taxpayers, for the agency to make sure that we have an owner's rep with the kind of background that we need in order to get a look at this thing and make sure that we're doing the right thing. And I want to put a motion on the floor then that we hire an owner's rep, if that's the way it works, and vote on it.
So you've made a motion.
I just did.
Okay, so let's have some discussion. So Gary, I'll start in laying this is to your point. It sounds like that the takeaway from the committee was to hire an owner's rep. I'm guessing, Gary, where you've maybe diverged a little with your personal feelings are you don't want to do the hiring of the owner's rep and the bidding simultaneously. You want to get the owner's rep in place first and then do the bidding.
That's correct, because I believe that owner's rep function will help us get a better value proposition on the building.
Okay, so then would this owner's rep, and pardon everyone for my lingo, I'm not an expert on construction either, so an owner's rep sounds like a good idea. Would this owner's rep be going all the way back to the initial design and looking at that? 2, just picking up the plans that there are in existence and just focusing on the bids? Or 3, more of the construction manager, just working with after the bidding?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, what you envision, just so I understand.
I think it would be a mistake to go all the way back to the beginning.
Okay.
I think basically based on everything I've seen, I think we've probably got a great design that fits management's needs. I need a little bit of comfort to push me across the finish line on it personally. And I think an owner's rep coming in at this point and I don't think this takes a lot of time. I could be wrong. Runs through the drawings that exist and says that makes a lot of sense, and or 90% of them are right, but I think we ought to take a look at X on this section of the project to see if we can get a better deal on it.
Okay.
Not a deal in terms of finances, but a deal in terms of the design side of it. 80% of the cost, there's an old adage in engineering, at least in manufacturing, 80% of the cost of any product, 80% of it is baked in the design. So you don't worry about the last 20% of it. You worry about the 80%. You worry about the design. That's where you put your effort. And personally, I'm not there yet with this project.
So this person would be assisting with going out to bids, looking at some of the products that are being used in various areas, and then overseeing the actual construction project itself.
Correct. In a perfect world, this group person, whatever, would have been involved much earlier.
So would the committee be involved in the procurement or the interview process of this person in your head, or would this be the agency making a recommendation?
I guess flying right off, taking a flyer on this, I would think maybe a joint group.
Okay, those are the questions I had. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Yes, Ms. McNamee.
I would like to know, Gary, what your expectation is on how much time this will take.
When I turn it on, it starts buzzing. It's like,
Well, Donna, I'll repeat your question, so it's in the record. You're asking what my expectation of timing on this would
the
be.
timing on this, how
Right.
much time would it take to accomplish what you're proposing?
I don't think it's more than a couple of months myself, maybe 2-3 months at the very outside. I think it's a relatively straightforward process. But I could be wrong. I am by no means an expert in this. My expectation is we could get through this pretty quickly.
And do I understand correctly that the purpose would be to try to save money?
In an ideal world, sure. But I think it's also, on a personal level, it's a level of comfort to say, yes, let's proceed on a $23 million project. But, and even beyond that, on the flip side of this, instead of worrying about the delay on this side, let's talk about the flip side. When we get the go-ahead, assuming we get a go-ahead, then we've got a person who is dedicated to making sure that we're getting the right thing that we're paying for. And I mean, no aspersions to our current management at all in any way, shape or form, but I don't think we're paying management to be construction managers. We're paying management to run the business. Let's get somebody in who can take care of the construction project. Because, you know, if the flip side of this, Donna, is, and we talked a little bit about this at the committee meeting. In fact, I even pointed at Ben. If somebody asked, what happens if it goes wrong? Well, the way we're structured right now, Ben, you know, I mean, Ben's the CEO, and if 5 years down the road, there's cracking on the building or whatever it might be, and we haven't hired somebody to be our spokesman, if you will, with expertise, how's the board going to look, and how's management going to look? Well, geez, we spent $23 million and we had the CEO be the construction manager. The optics there are very uncomfortable for me.
We have done design, bid, build projects all along. We've never had that kind of problem. My concern is the cost that it's going to be just by more delays. And where are we going with this? Can we even open that design process up?
One thing I conferred with Mr. Dines briefly here. Mr. Sheets had made a motion for, we don't have a construction, or excuse me, an owner's rep to hire. So I would make your motion a motion of a recommendation that we open the procurement process for an owner's rep. Is that how you would word it?
I would ask Mr. Sheets if your intention is to move to have Laketran pursue and send out an RFP to qualified construction owners representatives to assist in the project.
If that's what it takes, yes.
So Mr. Sheets made the motion. I should have asked, is there a second, and then open discussion? So at this time I would ask, is there a second to Mr. Sheets' motion? Seconded by Ms. Nunnally. Now we can go back to discussion. And I apologize for my procedural gaffe on that one.
Real quickly, I would also say that it should be an RFQ for this type of work. So just for the record, that is important.
Let me ask you that point too, because I was taking that directly from the Laketran manual. But RFQ instead of the RFP
Yes,
manual.
yeah.
And I think 2.45 and 2.46 suggest an RFP.
Now, this would be subject to the Brooks Act, if I'm correct, Andrea, so it would have to be an RFQ.
Okay.
Going back to the design.
I think, well, I think, since I need to make sure I do this, let me make sure I reiterate what was said, if that's okay, Mr. President. It would be to start the procurement process for an owner's rep. And so I'll mix schedule into this just so everyone has an idea. The procurement process takes approximately 2 months. There would be a contract process after that, which we usually allot 30 days. We probably could do it a little quicker. So realistically, if we're moving as quick as possible, we would still have an August board meeting, but it would be to award a contract to an owner's rep. Then they would need to have as much time as we decide to give them to review the plans. I would guess the board would want at least a month, maybe 2. Then you would initiate the bidding process for the project. And so that takes 2 months again. So if we procure the person, 2 months, review process, 2 months, procure the construction, another 2 months. So you'd be in total 6 months if you wanted 2 months of the person reviewing the documents. The 4 months of procurement are pretty inflexible. So it'd be realistically, I don't think it could be less than 5 months. But again, that depends on the board's desire for how long we review the process. If change to the design documents was required, we would most likely need to bring a motion to the board to Bowen will inevitably ask for more money. We would have to change those documents, recalculate the estimate, and then go back to bid. That would probably add 90 days. So it depends. But I think the quickest is probably 6 months, I think, if that's the process we wanted. We could, depending on the board's comfort level, initiate the procurement process for the building while hiring the owner's rep. Doesn't sound like that's what the board is asking for, but that's a rough, at least that's what I heard schedule wise.
So when you're going out to get the RFQ, how does Laketran have to hire? Is it lowest bid
No, so the way an RFQ,
to choose?
yeah, so the way this type of professional service falls under a rule called the Brooks Act, which means we put out a procurement, we ask for qualifications, we put a matrix in the RFP that is how we're going to evaluate them. They are rated and evaluated, and price is not a component that is discussed. Once you select your highest ranked firm, then you enter price negotiations with them. If you can arrive at a number that everyone is happy with, you sign a contract. If you can't, you move to the second ranked firm, and then you kind of keep going till you find the right.
So grading with that scale, would that be the design committee and you?
Yeah, that could be kind of anything. Traditionally, we do it as staff, but we could very easily, we do usually have an interview committee, and that could consist of staff. I think what Gary said, staff and the committee members together.
And at the end of that process, say 6 months out,
Would we have Bowen then wanting to look at their costs again to see where they were? I mean, are we talking another $10,000 a day?
I mean, at this point, I'm not comfortable with the 23 million that's being proposed. I mean, with what we were talking about with all these specific grants and stuff earlier, my comments about a month or two ago were for the not to exceed of what those totaled moving forward. So I'm looking here at a scale down, and I don't know how anybody else feels about that, but the initial 18 mil when we were talking a couple months ago wasn't sitting well with what we were looking at either. Because I wasn't sure about the garage portion of it or the storage that was really, I feel like I couldn't get a straight answer on what was like supposed to be actual and what buses were supposed to be actually covered and those types of things. So that's what an owner's rep would help us seek out and understand as far as, yeah, what really is needed and what's not.
This is a question for Ben. If the timetable were to get stretched out a little bit to do an owner's rep first and then do the bids for the project, are there any additional grants that can be applied for to mitigate cost increases for headquarters projects? Because I'm hearing my temperature is a little bit that money is very important, but getting the owner's rep in place to make sure everything's being done right is the most important thing because there's not a comfort level to move forward without that piece. But I'd like to know, is there eligibility for more grants?
So my gut thought is probably, I think also it's important, I'm going to go back quite a few slides to, oops, I went too far, to this slide. So that $25,000, those are grants that were awarded during COVID that don't have a designation. So I think it's perfectly reasonable for the board to consider at their comfort level, spending dollars out of that dollar amount. Because really those were all grants. We've since just converted them to cash. But that was 22 million and change in grants that came in during COVID that didn't have a plan. So I would say that's a good source. We probably also, Andrea and I can kind of circle the wagons and talk and go over things. I would imagine there is additional funding available. The federal government is not shy with transit grant dollars right now in any stretch of the imagination.
Mr. Chairman,
I think Mr. Zibble asked to speak. Let's let him.
Ben, could you just reiterate the $14.7 million grant and how that is structured? Just from my standpoint, it was 80-20 project or 80-20, 20% local, 80% for the grant. So that would take the 14.7 to $18.3 million. And it's either an all or none.
Yeah, so the minimum local match is 20%. It's called overmatching. You can overmatch to your heart's content.
Right.
So this slide, yeah, the minimum for that grant is, the grant amount is 14.6, the local is 3.6, and then the total is 18.3. Was that your question?
Well, part of the question was too, if you wanted to spend less than the 18.3, does the 14.681 still hold? Or is it gone? I thought that at one point somebody made the comment that you had to spend all of it to get it all.
I believe it was all or nothing.
That's what I was thinking. I just wanted to make sure that I was still correct on that thought.
Yeah.
So from that standpoint, the $18.3 million project is really a base project for us. If you want to use that grant. If you don't want to use that grant, then you can go to any dollar amount that you want.
Yeah, I think that's accurate. In the event that we accomplished the goals that we outlined in the grant and it came in slightly less, we could probably discuss it with the Federal Transit Administration. Hey, the objectives have been met. What alternate could we have? But that would have to be at the conclusion of a project.
Yeah.
Couldn't really be at this kind of phase.
But I guess it's partly goes over to Daniela's question about scaling back on the project. I mean, again, to me, it's 18.3 is a bottom line number that we need to be thinking about as a project.
and the longer we play around with it, the more we're throwing money out the door. The money we have here otherwise, I feel the best use of it for the taxpayers is to put it into meaningful projects that are otherwise needed, such as service. We know fuel's going to continue to increase. There's a host of things. I don't understand why we would want to stretch this out another 6 months or more, only to have it cost more.
That's not necessarily true. I mean, the price of lumber goes up and down every other month. Yes, steel goes up right now, but you're seeing fluctuations across the board as far as everything that you're building with. So it's not necessarily, that number that we looked at, yeah, that was an increase, but we also weren't looking at steel shortages back then or concrete shortages. Right now we have a bunch of aggregate shortages and some other things going on. So if we wait another 6 months, we could be in a really good area and the concrete could come back and we could get more supply. So it's all over the board right now. It's not necessarily like, oh, it is 10 G's every day. I mean, or however much it was. I mean, that's a little bizarre to look at the trends that way. But
Those trends for
if you
normal
put out
times?
this number of, hey, we're spending $25 million on a new Laketran headquarters, And the taxpayers are looking at it going, I just spent, you know, however much local that'll end up being, let's call it $5 million locally. You want to have a good representation and usage of the taxpayer money. And that's what we are here to do, to mitigate all that. And I think we owe it to people, we owe it to the taxpayers to make sure that we are getting the best bang for our buck as far as what we're spending our money on. 25, 23, however much this ends up being, $1 million is a lot of money for a brand new building project.
And only a very small part of it will come out of Laketran's tax fund, the sales tax. And getting this building complete, as we've heard the commissioner say, it's good for Lake County, it's good for Laketran, it's good for Laketran's passengers. And I just don't see any reason to continue to drag this out. We've been at this for a year.
Not all of us.
May I, Mr. President, just to be clear, our motion on the table is relative to hiring an owner's rep. Far be it from legal counsel telling anybody what to talk about. I just want to make sure we're still on topic. And I think it's important for me because many of you in this room have reached out to me, and I just want to reiterate within, and I think maybe it was perhaps Mr. Swanson or someone, but within Laketran's procurement guidelines, the directive page 10, 2.4.6 provides for project management. Project requiring expertise in specific areas will have outside project oversight. Project updates will be done on a weekly, monthly basis with Laketran staff until the project is complete. Someone else mentioned to me, and that harkens back to Bowen's restart documents, which talked about the complexity and the size of the project. And they're working on the construction documents. So I just, to Mr. Sheets's motion, which was seconded, I think the discussion has focused on an owner's rep, but then it's gone in a little bit more of the money. I just want to make sure everybody understands that the discussion on the table right now for purposes of the motion is relative to the rep. And finally, the final point too, and I'm sorry, Mr. President, I forget who mentioned it, but keep in mind too that Laketran does assure the federal government through the assurances provided in some of the documents. Number one, that it will comply with requirements of the assisting agency in regard to the construction plans and specifications. Two, will provide and maintain competent and adequate engineering supervision at the construction site to ensure that the complete work conforms with approved plans and specifications, and also furnish reports and other information as may be required by the assisting agency. And I bring that up because some of you had talked about the importance and relevance of owner's rep and how that ties into what our assurances are as an agency and what we have to be mindful of. Some of you voiced your specific concerns of your individual personal liabilities as a board member and also to the taxpayers. So I just wanted to reiterate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Guines. Mr. Swanson?
I'll hold my comment because it was going off on a tangent. So to Brandon's comment, it was actually a follow-up question for Chuck. So I'll ask you afterwards if I'm allowed to do that.
We can have some discussion after. Keeping, as Mr. Guines has reminded us, keeping on track with the owner's rep, is there any other discussion regarding the possible hiring of an owner's rep?
Yeah, I have just one point of clarification, I guess. I'm still not sure where the owner's rep's responsibilities are going to be starting. Is it just to review the plans, or is it going to be to review the programming as to what is needed? Or is it just going to be saying, okay, we accept what is the program, which is the design criteria for the building? Or is it just going to be focusing on, are the materials to be modified, or is it just a different method of construction to be evaluated and looked at? Or are we going back to the program? Your thoughts, Gary?
Well, I'll duck that a little bit, Chuck, by saying I think it's what we decide as a group. I personally don't see this going all the way back to the beginning. I truly don't. I think we've done enough work, management's done enough work to get a good sense of what they think they need, and we should honor that to the best of our abilities. But I think we owe it to the process to make sure that we as a board are comfortable that it's been looked at independently, I guess is the best way to say it, to say, yes, the way it's designed right now makes sense with current conditions, and will achieve what we want it to achieve.
Okay, so we're just looking for construction materials and methodologies.
In my mind, yes. In my mind, the layout is, it seems to have been vetted pretty extensively.
And I would agree there's value in doing value engineering. I mean, under a lot of the other EPA type grants, you had to do value engineering on all the projects that were going out. And that was to look at a lot of the processes that were going on and alternatives to that. So, and the owner's rep, I think, is very important because, as Mr. Dines pointed out, we have to assure that the plans are being conformed to and the specifications are being conformed to, so that we're getting what we had proposed, put out on the street to build, that we get what we were supposed to get. So I think with the owner's rep or the construction project representative is a very key point to have on this.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I do not object to the owner's rep. What I am objecting to is further delays and potential cuts to this project. We've got $25 million in grants, and we should get this thing built as soon as possible so that we have it for the employees. They are literally sitting in halls at this point. This makes no sense when we've been handed this money to delay it and potentially, I mean, $10,881 a day is just nuts.
I would, real quick, I would say that me and my team are in favor of having an owner's rep. I think what Gary said is accurate. We welcome that protection. And while we are skilled in construction management, it isn't our day-to-day. So having a person here to do that, I think, is great. I also do want to make sure the board knows that the only reason we didn't before is cost. We have a minimal amount from Bowen, but this would be a little bit more. So what I would also recommend the board do as part of the recommendation to hire one is think about what budget the board is comfortable with so that we have a target in the procurement process, because these are things that can be $500,000 or several $1 million. And I think putting that out in advance would be a good idea on the board's behalf to think about. So those are my 2 cents.
My own view of it, based solely on what we learned with Chuck, and Chuck, you're closer to this than I am for sure, but it really comes down to how complicated, how encompassing you want their role to be. And a large part of that is already off the table in my view. If we said, hey, go all the way back to the start, well, you're going to be closer to the $1 million. I don't think we're talking about that from my perspective. I think the bigger part of the cost is going to be going forward, having them or their representative on site, making sure that the construction is going along the way. But how much of 1% versus 4% that represents, I don't know.
Yeah, I think one thing that we've got to keep in mind when you guys go out for the RFQ is, what does that scope of work look like? You know, we're talking about variances of what we want this person to do, but we're going to have some sort of scope of work for this person to be able to bid toward. So I'm not sure how we get from here to there, but that's just, one comment I have on that.
Yeah, and that was, I think your point is well taken, Bill, and that was one of the reasons why I asked if this was going to be a little bit of a joint effort with the special projects committee on the procurement of it, because the scope, just thinking about it, sounds overwhelming on exactly what you want. And my personal opinion is hiring an owner's rep is a little bit like hiring a lawyer. You need to have the right on paper credentials, but there's also a certain chemistry component to it as well.
Keep in mind also that Bowen will ask for additional fees when they have to justify anything the value engineer comes back with.
Any other discussion regarding an owner's rep?
in that procurement process, by defining the scope of work, will that also control the amount of time he's spending on this to get to the point where we can actually procure Bowen to get this going? Or are we just gonna hand it to him and say, if it takes you 1 month, fine, if it takes you 10, that's fine too?
I would think that would come up in the interview process based on what the agency is looking for. How long do you envision this taking?
Yeah, the scope can provide deadlines. So I would think when we put the RFP documents together with the committee, that deadlines would be put in that document as part of the criteria component, so that the people that are putting their qualifications in know, I have to have my review done by this date. So.
And I wouldn't put any my 2 cents, I wouldn't put any unreasonable deadline that we want an answer within 15 days or
Right.
something. I would want to make sure that they have the time to do their proper job.
Correct, but I wouldn't want it unreasonable at either end. We don't want them to just take 15 days, nor do we want them to take 15 months.
Don't disagree with that.
Can we call the question?
Sure. Do you want me to read the motion again, or do we think we have it in good form?
Do you remember it? Or you wanna-
I wrote down, we have a motion on the floor to start the procurement process RFQ for an owner's rep, and this would be a joint effort between the Special Projects Committee and the agency. Close enough?
With a budget of,
Well, this is just for the procurement. too.
that would be published as part of the RFQ process. So I think the board as a whole should have an idea of that.
I would think that would be to the Special Projects Committee to determine between 1 and 4, no more than 4% of project cost. And then we leave it to the Special Projects Committee to determine the exact amount, unless anyone strongly objects to that. Okay,
Well, do we know what the project cost is gonna be? Project cost as of today, or project cost when it starts moving?
If I might suggest, we just don't go over 750. We have grant dollars for it. It's not the full 4%.
I may be naive on this, but I would hope we could do better than that.
Brandon.
Well, I was just gonna say procedurally, you stated the motion. Now, with the questions called, essentially, motion's been reread. Purpose now is time for a vote. If we want to enter back into discussion, we'll have to do that.
Let's just call the motion.
You were clarifying what he read. It's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I think we're fine to call the motion as is. I think we trust the Special Projects Committee. Trudy, please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
McNamee,
Yes.
Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Swanson,
Yes.
Zibble.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Specifically related to owner's rep, was there any other discussion? Okay, transitioning into old business, did we have any other general discussion about the headquarters project?
I would, real quick, just as a matter, if we are proceeding with the schedule I outlined, the board would want to be prepared for an August special meeting with the objective to award a contract to an owner's rep. Just because that's not on the calendar now.
I'm confused. I thought we were going forward with the owner's rep first,
That's-
hiring in the procurement process.
It would be to hire the owner, it would be the board will still need to take action to hire the owner's rep, which would have to take place at either at an August board meeting or a September board meeting.
Okay,
You'll be ready in the.
yeah, that's what I was
No.
thinking. That's 2 months to post the RFQ and go through the whole.
Andrea, our legs will be tired.
With I have a draft owner's rep procurement document currently. It would, in my opinion, if as a joint venture with the special committee meeting, the onus is now on the special projects committee to review the document. And, commit to interview dates, because in an effort of full and open public procurement, I like to include the possible interview dates in the procurement document. So it's summertime and there are vacations and everything. And I would want the special project committee to be committed to certain interview dates ahead of time before the procurement is issued.
Speaking for the committee, yes.
So then I would say, based on my knowledge of people's availability, then never mind, we will probably have that meeting it'll probably be in September. So that, I don't know if we will be able to get this done by August 22nd.
I'm really confused.
Yeah,
There's a lot of vacations
on your side of the equation.
and I think there's at least one board member on vacation too. Well, we'll temporarily.
Does your phone work?
Be in Alaska.
Not. We'll more, never mind.
Why don't we focus
revisit
on
that.
the-
I'm sorry.
You okay, Gary?
Yes, we'll do everything we can on our side to expedite the process.
So why don't we start with sending the draft RFQ so everyone can comment or red line, and then you'll work on setting up special project committee meetings.
Yes, sir.
Great. Okay. Any other discussion in general about the headquarters project costs, et cetera, that was not able to be discussed when we were discussing owner's rep?
I'm just gonna generally say, I hope this does not drag out any longer, Mr. Chairman. It's drag out long enough. We need to get it moving and not waste the taxpayer dollars. Just $10,000 a day. I can't stress enough how insane that is to try to save money.
Any other discussion? Any new business? At this time, is there a motion to adjourn today's Board of Trustee meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Motion made by Mr. Zibble, seconded by Ms. Nunley. Trudy, if you could please call the roll.
Epic,
Yes.
McNamee,
Yes.
Nunley,
Yes.
Sheets,
Yes.
Swanson, Zibble.
Yes.
Thank you, everyone. We are adjourned at 5:56.